Tonight, I have the distinct pleasure of being joined by two American patriots who you will not see on Fox News, on CNN, on MSNBC. But I'm here tonight with Larry Klayman and, of course, Ryan Bundy. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me.
You're welcome, Jason. Thank you, as usual, for Crowdsource the Truth, which tells the truth. And that's why we're on your show tonight.
And the other reason you guys are joining me tonight is because of an extremely disturbing development in the ongoing saga whereby the United States government has oppressed Ryan, his brothers, his father, his entire family, and their associates. What can you guys tell us about the latest development?
I'll do a quick lead-in and turn it over to Ryan. We know the story of the standoff. It began over 4 years ago, and it was successful. The Bundys have ranched that land for 150 years, going back to Cliven's great-grandfather, loved it. And, of course, the Bureau of Land Management tried to move in, and they tried to take over that land. They assaulted Cliven's sister, Margaret. They tased his sons. They killed bulls in the herd. They had their lives threatened. They tried to drive them off the land. And it's part and parcel to not just the Bureau of Land Management, but the federal government, which claims to own that land, but it does not own that land. The state of Nevada and the people of Clark County owe the land by virtue of succession. And in fact, we have a lawsuit to have a declaration issued by a Nevada court to that effect. But over the course of the last year, of course, I had been lobbying Attorney General Jeff Sessions to, get rid of the case after Judge Navarro dismissed the indictment with prejudice. I also had filed criminal complaints against the prosecutors for their prosecutorial abuse. Nothing happened. Ryan, meanwhile, has filed a lawsuit against the prosecutors and against the BLM and the Justice Department for prosecutorial abuse, misconduct, threatening witnesses, suppressing evidence for whatever, and that's pending in the District of Columbia. So we had hoped, and we tried to settle this matter. We said, let's everybody go off, live their lives, and leave the Bundys alone. But what's happened here is that the Justice Department, which has been in a state of disarray and has become the Department of Injustice in many ways, didn't take control. In fact, who took control? The same prosecutors that committed crimes themselves by lying to the judge, suppressing evidence, threatening whistleblowers, and conducting such a terrible abuse of process that even a judge like Navarro, who was handpicked by Senator Harry Reid, appointed by Obama, very unfavorable to the defendants, even she had to dismiss the case. Well, they just appealed this case. They tried to take 3 extensions in the course of the last year. I've opposed the extensions, and the briefs that were filed yesterday, and they started this appeal, and their goal is to overturn the conviction and to retry this case. They're trying to save their own skins because, based on what Navarro found, they could likely be disbarred. I would say, it's a potential possibility, much less lose their jobs as Justice Department prosecutors. It's basically to cover their own backsides. And, of course, who is being persecuted by this? The Bundys again, because now it's up on appeal, and they want to try to retry the case. It's simply a gross injustice. And who is handling the appeal? The office of the same prosecutors, the U.S. Attorney in the District of Nevada, who committed these crimes, who committed obstruction of justice, who committed gross prosecutorial abuse. And I want to say this. I'm going to turn this over to Ryan right now. But during the trial, I was there. I was advising. Navarro wouldn't let me into the case. But Ryan was the big hero. There were lots of heroes. Cliven was a hero. Ammon was a hero. Others as well. Ryan Payne, another defendant. But Ryan represented himself pro se. And he was better than any lawyer that was there. And I've been trying to convince him to go to law school, but I think he knows too much to go to law school.
Might be more effective as a pro se.
Right. I think the professors would be outclassed.
Yeah.
So I want to turn it over to Ryan to get his take on what's going on. And he is a true American hero. He ran for governor recently. He didn't win. You don't usually win the first time. Abraham Lincoln lost the first 6 elections before he was elected president. But I hope that someday he will be the governor of Nevada.
Absolutely. Ryan, thank you once again for joining us, and I must second Larry's statements. I was so impressed seeing you in the courtroom there. I was very unfamiliar with your case when I first arrived, and also hadn't spent that much time observing criminal proceedings in a court, and I was just blown away by how you handled it, and the results speak for themselves.
Well, thank you. And hey, you know, I just tell people that, you know, when you back a tiger in the corner, he's going to fight his way out. And so I really had no other choice but to do all I could and to learn all I could. And I knew I couldn't trust my life with an attorney. I had things I knew that couldn't be communicated, and I had to be able to speak on my own and for my own behalf. And so therefore I stood sui juris without the, you know, service of an attorney.
Mm-hmm. And of course, that's every American's right. I think just the fact that you defended yourself in that way is something that people need to really pay attention to. I also want to remind everyone that even though Ryan's campaign for governor is over, he is still legally allowed to raise money in that campaign. So if people want to support Ryan financially in the efforts that he's going to there in the state of Nevada, you can go to governorbundy.com and you can click on that donate button. So
yeah,
Ryan,
and the reason I want to say, Jason, is
yes,
because candidates are allowed to retire their debt. That's the reason that they can still raise money.
Got it.
Well, I do need to make a little bit of a correction here. I don't believe that donate button and the direction it goes to is activated at this point. So if donations, they probably just need to be sent directly to my mailing address. I had to look into that website, but I know I shut most all the services that I was using down.
Got it.
And so I don't believe that my donate button will work right now.
Sorry about that, Ryan. I should have cleared that up with you first. So let's talk specifically about the case. I don't know that much about the law, but I always understood that when a judge dismissed a case with prejudice, that with prejudice indicated that there cannot be an appeal. What's different about this, and why is it happening?
Well, it's I guess they have an opportunity to appeal. Yes, dismiss with prejudice means that it cannot be tried again. Of course, what they're appealing is the judge's decision to dismiss it with prejudice. Now, their claim and their brief, their opening brief to their appeal, is basically stating that they don't believe that the judge's decision was correct, that they believe the judge was out of line by dismissing it with prejudice. And so their entire brief is just an argument claiming that the violations that they participated in were inadvertent, were accidental, they didn't know about these things, that it was all just kind of a small mishap, and therefore the judge's decision should be reversed and we should be retried.
Let me ask Ryan this, because Ryan's the one that opened up the can of worms, to put it most diplomatically. It's more than worms. He opened up the rat's nest with a motion that he had filed where he uncovered that certain evidence had not been produced. Ryan, tell us about that, because that's what got the ball rolling here, which led to the dismissal of the indictment with prejudice.
And again, that's one of those things where I had specific knowledge that I couldn't convey to an attorney. I knew that there was a particular camera that was set up, and more than one cameras, by the way, and that I knew that there would be evidence should have been recorded on that camera system. And so I made a motion of discovery to know exactly what that piece of equipment was, because I also suspected that it was a painting device wherein, you know, military ordnance could be directed by painting upon our house. Now, and so my motion was to find out what that equipment was. It was also suspected that it had a parabolic listening device attached to it, wherein they could listen in on our conversations through walls or whatever, however that works. And so I wasn't certain what that piece of equipment was, but I knew that it was there. And so I asked for a discovery upon what it was and what information did it collect. And the government replied with a he's fishing and with using anyway, they mocked me is what they did. Said I was fantastical talking about some mysterious device. And they basically just mocked me. And so the judge dismissed that or ruled against me on that motion of discovery. And so then throughout the trial, through the hearings, I began to ask the witnesses about this particular device. The other defendants, their attorneys, they thought I was crazy for continuing to ask. But I finally found a witness that acknowledged that the camera existed and that it had a live feed to the operations center, and that's not the particular camera, but that is a camera.
Is this not similar to what it looked like?
No, it wasn't. This one was sitting on a tripod, and it was in a square box.
Well, I remember, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Ryan, but I remember this is where I, by chance, happened to be in the courtroom, and I heard you and one other witness describe a camera the size of a football, which seemed very strange to me. You said there were lasers on it, and that seemed strange. And then I asked on a broadcast on Crowdsource The Truth, I asked Mr. Whipple what he thought about that. Didn't he think it was strange that in 2014 a digital camera would be described as being as large as a football? And it was some people in the Crowdsource audience that pointed me to these hike vision cameras. I might be showing the wrong one right now, but that camera, they had spoken in very specific language about it, that it was live streaming to 4 different locations, but it wasn't recorded at those locations. And when I saw this camera advertised online there, some of the capabilities described were that it had an internal memory chip that could record. And
Jason, why is that important, okay? It's important because the surveillance would show that the Bundys were not threatening anyone.
Right.
That they weren't even armed, okay? And that there, in fact, were snipers on the hills. That was something that came out too. They were surrounded by snipers and sharpshooters. So this is inculpatory evidence.
Now, it's interesting, in their appeal, I noticed, and I had never actually heard this argument until reading their appeal, but they are claiming that now we made the argument previously that we might have mistaken the camera for a sniper, which, like I said, I've never heard that until I read their brief last night.
Right.
And so they're bringing in an argument that was never part of our argument. But no, there were actual snipers. We have evidences of it, and yet now they're still trying to play down the sniper issue to the point where they're trying to confuse the Ninth Circuit by saying that we mistook the camera for a sniper, which is simply not true.
Not only that, as I remember, Ryan, is that long before this whole thing started, the U.S. Attorney at the time, Daniel Bogdan, and the #1 U.S. Attorney Assistant, Myray, and Dan Sheets, #2, and 3, Ahmed, they came out there to set everything up with the FBI to try to entrap you and to try to create a situation where they could charge you with crimes.
Wow. See, now that's very interesting and an important point to bring out, because an attorney, a prosecuting attorney, shouldn't get involved until there's an actual crime that has supposedly been committed, and therefore the complaint or claim that there's been a crime committed is turned over to them, and then they get involved. And yet we have photograph evidence that the prosecution team was on our ranch 2 weeks prior to the roundup.
Wow. Which
means they were planning and preparing for a prosecution prior to any supposed crime being committed.
Wow.
If that's not entrapment, I don't know what is.
Well, it's also the most un-American thing I've ever heard. That's crazy.
Yeah. There was early testimony that some of the agents who were communicating with Ryan and his brothers and his dad, they were secretly tape recording those conversations. Now, under Nevada law, that's illegal. There's 2-party consent in Nevada. They claimed, of course, they could do that in terms of, federal law, surreptitious communications. But the problem was they also lied on the witness stand about it, and they got caught on that. So it was not just hiding of evidence, and there's a lot more that we couldn't even get into, this interview, but it was lying under oath to the court, to the jury, and to the judge. And then, of course, the head prosecutor, Stephen Myray, and Dan Sheese, his assistant, would get up and lie to Judge Navarro about what they knew about this exculpatory evidence. And they got caught with their hand in the cookie jar. So the irony here is that they're the ones who should be indicted and tried, not the Bundys.
Well, and furthermore on that, this same prosecutor, Stephen Myray, back in 2009, was actually caught and penalized for doing the same thing in another case. And yet here he is, still the chief prosecutor in the district court.
Wow.
So why was he not removed back when? And he's now conducting the same type of violations, and yet there's no punishment to him.
And we've had these complaints pending with the Office of Professional Responsibility and Inspector General at the Justice Department. I even had to go to court to seek to force them to move forward. Former Attorney General Sessions promised he was going to do an investigation. Now, of course, the Justice Department has no real leadership. It's got Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker. I wrote to him before this appeal was consummated. I wrote to the head of the criminal division. I wrote to the Office of Professional Responsibility, the Inspector General, and I said, look into these things. Do not proceed with this appeal. There's been enough injustice. The Bundys have already done 2 years in prison. Cliven was even in solitary confinement for a while. Navarro put him in solitary. But there's nobody in charge at the Justice Department. And who took control of this appeal? The same U.S. Attorney's Office that Ryan is saying has previously gotten caught committing prosecutorial abuse. They're protecting themselves because they want a finding from the Ninth Circuit that it was just inadvertent or negligent, because that way they'll get to keep their law licenses. But if they lose, and Navarro's decision holds up, and I believe it will when, we put up the defense that we're going to put up, I'm certain of it, they're going to lose their law licenses, and they're going to be banished to a field office in the Justice Department, shuffling papers for the rest of their lives.
How do I spell Stephen Myray, Larry?
M-A-H-R-E.
There we go. Very difficult to find him. Stephen Myray. So this is really a big deal. I think the average person does not expect that prosecutors working for the government are making a regular practice of going into the court and lying like this. It's really shocking.
Well, that's an interesting point that, our case has done, is it's brought to light a lot of the misconduct that the government is doing in not just trial, but in many cases and many other things. That's what's been so, I guess, important about our cases. It keeps revealing bad conduct by the government. These prosecutorial violations, it's not just isolated to our case. This is how they obtain many of the convictions. I watched in several cases, a couple of my own. Again, I went to court in Oregon and won that case, and come down here and went through this process, and I've witnessed many others. And they have a pattern of manipulating the case and the trial so as to harm the defendant and prevent him from bringing forth the truth, the evidence. They will put motions of limine in, limiting the evidence, the witnesses, the testimony. The judge will preclude and exclude witness testimony and or evidences. Through these practices, the jury is not able to hear the whole story. We hear that they're supposed to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And that is not the goal of the government and the prosecutors, nor their goal is to obtain a conviction, regardless of what they have to do to violate the rights of the defendant.
By the way, that's not Stephen Myray, Jason. So.
And that's
remarkably difficult.
Put us back into
remarkably difficult to find a photograph of Stephen Myray.
Yeah, well, he slivers along underground. in darkness.
None of these photos are him?
No.
That's amazing, because I got the spelling of his name out of an article about him, Stephen M-A-H-R-E. You put in Stephen Myre, federal prosecutor.
No, that's not the same one. It's M-A-H-R-E.
I have that. That's what I'm saying. Okay. It says, did you mean mayor? I've got Stephen M-A-H-R-E. You type this into Google, Stephen Myre, federal prosecutor.
Well, maybe he goes by an alias, you know. I mean, it was Woody Allen who, when asked why he thought the Russians started the revolution in 1917, said because they were angry that the word czar was spelled two different ways, you know. So maybe there's some subterfuge here on behalf of Myre, because certainly people that see what this prosecutor has done should be angry.
And they should be able to find him online. I'm going to keep looking here. So he's a U.S. attorney in Nevada, right?
He's an assistant U.S. attorney. He used to be the #1 assistant. They claim that he was demoted, but he's still there. I doubt that he's been demoted. They protect their own. And Elizabeth White, who filed this appeal, I mean, she's a real nasty person, I'll tell you. And she's just running interference for Myre and Sheese and Ahmed and Daniel Bogdan before that, the former U.S. attorney, who committed all of these infractions.
That's him, yeah?
That may have been him a long time ago. He doesn't look that way now. He's about, I'd say about 150 pounds heavier.
Okay. It's very difficult to find.
There he is at the bottom there. No, that's Jeff Sessions. Okay.
No. Very tall. He's like 6'5" or.
There he is. You got him there.
We've got him.
That's it.
Slippery character. Very difficult to find on the internet. He obviously doesn't want us to look at him and know who he is. But this is disgraceful. The fact, I mean, this is the problem that we're dealing with, gentlemen. When we can't have justice from the Justice Department, all is lost.
Let me tell you, when I filed the complaint initially for two other defendants who were acquitted, Rick Loveland and Stephen Stewart, similar complaint to what I filed for Ryan for prosecutorial abuse. Government didn't even have any evidence against them. And, you know, these people were dragged along for 2 years and put in prison. As you have to do on a complaint, I put the addresses in of the prosecutors, and they screamed to high heaven. You know, they didn't want their addresses known. Okay, yet at the same time, everybody knows the Bundys' address in Bunkerville, and they were the ones that, you know, were threatened and harmed. I took it out, you know, when they complained. But, you know, these people treat themselves as if they're above the law, and you know, they don't treat defendants the way they want to be treated. And consequently, they're cowards. That's what they are. They're cowards.
Right. So let's talk a little bit, if we can, about this trip that you just came back from, Larry. You went to see Cliven, of course, Ryan's father, there on the ranch. And why don't you give us just a little background, Larry, of what some of these images are that we're looking at here?
And Ryan can augment it, because what was really important, I visited Cliven and his mom on Monday, this Monday. And I had been on the ranch before, but I'd never actually taken a tour. And Cliven, who's a great teacher, so is Ryan, by the way, very articulate, took me around the ranch. We did it for about 4 hours, and we went all the way around. You know, it sits on 400,000 plus acres in and around Lake Mead. It's one of the most beautiful pieces of land I've ever seen. And it's rugged. You know, Nevada's beautiful. People don't realize how beautiful it is. And what Cliven showed me was not just the improvements he's made on the land. See, he didn't need, and Ryan didn't need, and the family didn't need the Bureau of Land Management to come in and manage the land. This is their lifeblood. This land is our land. You know, they love this land, so they were taking care of the land. And he showed me how the Bureau of Land Management, you know, when the steers and the cattle eat at certain bushes, how they would use that as an excuse with their arbitrary percentages of, you know, bushes that were eaten. See one in the back behind Cliven right there? Well, that's a bush that was eaten a bit by a cow, okay, by cattle, and then it grows back, okay? It doesn't destroy the land, but, or the feed. And you correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but, you know, the Bureau of Land Management would come and say, okay, you know, the cows have eaten too much here and there, and now you got to move your cattle somewhere else. You can't eat here. And it creates a situation that, you can't ranch, and that's why hundreds of ranchers have been driven out of business, notwithstanding, the desert tortoise, which ironically the cattle like, and they like them. They even eat the manure. So
symbiotic relationship there.
This was all manufactured. So Harry Reid and his henchmen at the BLM, he put his chief of staff in, Neil Cornsey, could drive the Bundys off the land that they had ranched for 150 years, and it was reported that Reid and his son Rory were trying to sell the land to Chinese environmental interests. And, knowing Harry Reid, he was probably expecting kickbacks because, the federal government would have to sell it. He was the most powerful person in the U.S. Senate at the time. And, this is a terrible, terrible story. And Cliven also explained to me, and Ryan, again, jump in, how these grazing fees don't really go to grazing. I mean, they're all management fees.
Well, let me ask you a question, guys, because I think there's a big bit of confusion here. I think there are people out there who feel like this is a matter of some people who didn't want to pay their bills and now the government is coming after them. But what I understand from conversations with Brand Thornton and with you, Ryan, is that your family staked a claim on this land 100-something years ago when this was the Wild West and people could legally stake a claim to land, and there are certain legal parameters to that staking of a claim, maintaining the land as your family has by irrigating it and upkeeping it and maintaining the cattle and the vegetation, as Larry is describing, is your obligation as claim holders on the land. And you'd been doing that in accordance with the law, wanting to pay those fees to the state of Nevada, the true owner of the land, and now the federal government came in and basically wanted to steal it from the state of Nevada and the rightful claim holders. Is that right?
Yeah, mostly. And I do want to reiterate that this issue was never about grazing fees. It was never, ever, ever about grazing fees. That is the narrative that the BLM has put out to the public so as to detract from the real purpose and real meaning. The grazing fee that is charged is a minimal amount. And it's not an amount that is exorbitant. It's an amount that we can easily pay. And we actually sent that money to Clark County just to prove the point that that is not why we are doing what we're doing.
Right.
And so when they say that we owed them $1 million, number one, that's a complete arbitrary amount that just they picked out of the clear blue sky. Even if the grazing fees were an issue, they only amounted to like $8,000 that they claimed that we could owe. And then they, of course, added penalties and interest and stuff like that to the point where they claimed that we owed $288,000. But for them to come and try to gather our cattle for an amount that was less than $300,000 just doesn't sound good. And so somebody arbitrarily said, oh, they owe $1 million. And so then that's what's gone throughout the media ever since, is that the Bundys owe $1 million in past grazing fees, which is not true.
Fake
the other
news.
thing that the people don't, it's fake news, no doubt. The other things that people don't realize is that they spent, or were at least allocated to spend, $6 million on that operation. Who in their right mind spends $6 million to go and collect $1 million when the $1 million was a fabrication to begin with?
Right.
And it doesn't make any sense.
They murdered bulls in your what's the word I'm looking for? Herd. And obviously that's, you can't just go out and buy another one like it's a Toyota. Bulls are genetically bred over generations, aren't they?
Very expensive.
Yeah, and this is an interesting story. I learned a lot. And
I mean, there's bull sales, and yes, you can buy bulls.
Sorry, please continue, Ryan. We got a little delay there.
Ryan can tell you about this, but the Bundy family and Cliven and Ryan and the brothers, they actually developed a new breed of cattle that could survive on that land because it's very arid. And it's a mixture of the Brahman bull.
Yeah, and I could tell you just briefly about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. See, Brahma cattle have sweat glands and can actually sweat, so they can endure the heat. They're also very resistant to parasites and diseases and different sicknesses, and so they're a very much more healthy animal. And yet, the main market wants more of a English-bred Bos Indicus, or sorry, Bos Taurus type cattle, such as Hereford or Angus. But those cattle just simply won't survive down here in this desert. So we do some crossbreeding, and to where we have a partial Bos Indicus cattle mixed with Bos Taurus cattle, and therefore we have a breed of cattle that can survive in the desert and still meet market requirements.
Interesting. What's interesting, last Monday, Ryan's mom, Carol, cooked me and Cliven a steak. It was a Bundy steak. I got to tell you, it's the best steak I ever ate. I mean, it has a tremendous flavor. So they created something really special here, okay? And to kill the bulls in the herd was to destroy their financial livelihood.
Wow.
And Carol, after the federal government left, to use the term loosely government, because these were mercenaries, found all kinds of liquor bottles laying around. I mean, they were celebrating the demise of the Bundys. They were having a grand old time. The Bundys' lives were threatened. The peaceful protesters exercising their Second Amendment rights, they were threatened. There weren't guns pointed at the federal government. They attached some pictures to their brief. They don't really show that the guns are being pointed in the direction of the federal officers. But yes, when people around the country saw what was going on, the brutality, they came, many on horseback, and they came armed in self-defense. And that's why this is such an important story, and it's more than a story, it's an American heritage, is that this is the first time in modern history that the American people, using their sacred Second Amendment rights and First Amendment rights, stood up to an oppressive, tyrannical government and won. And that's what the government can't fathom. They can't stomach the fact that the citizens won. So, we call this how the West was won again, or we fought the law and we won, but it wasn't the law. The law was on our side. And consequently, this is an American story which is unprecedented, but these people in the U.S. Attorney's Office, they'll be happy to see the Bundys go away for life. They don't care. They have no heart. There's no humanity to them. And that's really what's scary about the Justice Department today, and the Justice Department that's likely to occur in the future. Now, when this new Attorney General comes in, I'm going to go with my colleague Bob Barr to him and say, get rid of this case. I mean, this is stench on the department. Will he do it? He's establishment. It's a long shot. So we really need to be prepared to defend ourselves in this proceeding and otherwise. So anyway, that's my piece here, because that's why I admire this family so much, because they are truly brave people. They were willing to risk life imprisonment because they believe in the Constitution of the United States, and they stood up against all odds, and they won, and will win again.
And we shouldn't minimize the fact that Ryan, his brother, his father, several other people who were involved have already spent years in prison, and we have a judge who found prosecutorial misconduct, and nothing happened to those involved in the misconduct that resulted in the wrongful imprisonment. Ryan, how do you feel about that?
Well, I'll tell you what, there's a complete breakdown of the age-old American principle that we are innocent until proven. They certainly do not treat those who are accused of crimes as innocent. They, in the courtroom, the judge will instruct the jury that they're innocent, but what the jury doesn't usually know is that they're chained and shackled underneath the benches so that the jury can't see. And we're treated as though we're guilty, and they claim that the time that someone is in jail prior to trial is not punishment, and yet we're treated the exact same. Anyway, I could go on for an hour about this subject.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is that there's some terrible injustices going on. Our rights that are supposed to be protected by the Constitution are not being protected. They're not being adhered to. And not just we, but many people who are accused of crimes, whether rightfully or wrongfully, are not being afforded their constitutional rights. And it's
Right.
a terrible atrocity on American people.
Now, just
I've got
today, William
Yeah.
Barr passed a pretty significant milestone. He was confirmed by the Senate, correct?
No, he wasn't confirmed. He was voted out of committee. It's got to go to the Senate floor to vote, and the Democrats will still try to do everything they can to block him. He probably will be confirmed, Jason, but he was voted out of the Judiciary Committee
Do we have any reason to believe that Attorney General William Barr will be helpful to the Bundys seeing justice?
Hope springs eternal. I mean, I wouldn't count on it, which is why we have to be prepared to defend ourselves, because this guy's an establishment figure. Now, let's give him the benefit of the doubt, and hopefully he's different than former Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who put his head in the sand, because he himself was under investigation by Special Counsel Robert Mueller and had been accused of lying in front of Congress and was probably wiretapped, by the Special Counsel, FBI, and the Justice Department with regard to the so-called Russian collusion, because he was on the campaign staff and the transition. But hopefully this guy will be different, but I wouldn't count on it because, the establishment circles the wagons and they protect themselves. And William Barr, is a former Justice Department official. So, they think everything's cool, everything's hunky-dory. The Justice Department is the Department of Justice. Well, Ryan and I have learned the Department of Justice is the Department of Injustice, and the American people now know that too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's very important for people to go to freedomwatchusa.org and support Larry and his team there, because they're fighting for a lot of really important things. I don't know how anyone could be on the other side of this issue unless, of course, they're complicit with the conspiracy to steal the land and the constitutional rights of the Bundy family. So what do we expect to happen next?
Well, what's happening next is that first of all, this is interesting and really unbelievable, is that the so-called government, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Nevada, asked for 3 extensions of time over the last year because they had to convince somebody at Main Justice to let them file it. God only knows who they convinced, okay? Hopefully the Heavenly Father will intervene and tell us.
Probably Rod Rosenstein, no?
Probably. And during that time period, for the last extension, they wanted 21 days. And I filed a pleading which said, no, Fisher cut bait. You've had enough time. And I attached a copy of Judge Navarro's order. And I said, these people are just trying to save their law licenses. We shouldn't persecute the Bundys anymore because it creates a lot of emotional distress. They have to do their work. They have to get on with their lives.
Sure.
And this is not right. Well, what's interesting is the Ninth Circuit on that third request for an extension, the U.S. Attorney in Nevada, never granted it. To this day, they have not granted the government the right to file these briefs with the appendix and everything else that goes with them.
But
so
yet
immediately when the U.S. Attorney filed those briefs yesterday, I filed another motion saying strike the briefs because they went past the deadline to file the briefs. Now, will the court probably grant it? It probably will. But I think that says something about how the Ninth Circuit is viewing this appeal. And people should know that even though the Ninth Circuit has a very liberal reputation, that liberals tend to be more pro-criminal defendant than conservatives. And I hope that they'll separate out all the fake news and everything else here. And the fact that it's in front of the Ninth Circuit does not mean that we're going to lose this case. In fact, the liberals on that court tend to protect people like the Bundys more than even the conservatives do. But again, this is a controversial case. The Bundys have been smeared. Everybody around them's been smeared. And we're just going to have to break through and show the court who we really are and put forward very strong arguments which even improve on what Judge Navarro wrote, because there's a lot more out there. And one thing as well, I might mention this because Ryan filed this motion. I helped him file it at the time. Before Navarro dismissed the indictment with prejudice, Ryan filed a motion to bring in this whistleblower, Larry Wooten, who was a BLM supervisor, who came forward out of conscience and sent a letter to the Bundys and to congressmen saying that inside of BLM, there was actually a kill list on the heads of the Bundys. Their heads were up on a wall with a target. Their Mormon faith was being disparaged and denigrated. There was exculpatory evidence, which we knew, but even more that was hidden and not turned over, and that this prosecutor, Myre, suppressed and threatened Larry Wooten to be quiet. And he never was brought in front of the court. And that's one of the reasons that Ryan and I think that Navarro dismissed the case, because, see, BLM was in effect, the surrogate of Harry Reid, who put his head man in there, Hornsey, and this was a blot on him, and the judge had been recommended to the bench by Reid and appointed by Obama. But Ryan's motion, which we filed, was meant to create a catch-22. We said to Navarro that if you don't dismiss this case, or at least rather before you dismiss this case, or consider dismissing this case, you must bring Larry Wooten in and put him on the witness stand under oath, because the letter is not evidence. And let's hear him, and let's let the other side, the prosecutors, even cross-examine him, and let's hear what he has to say, because, you see, that's the icing on the cake here, is Larry Wooten's testimony basically is the final blow of this prosecution in terms of their abuse.
Not only his. I want to bring to light the fact that Larry Wooten wrote this letter that was just totally damning to the BLM and their operation, and he was there on site, so he saw firsthand what was going on and all the atrocities, and he called attention to it to his superiors, and they dismissed him and basically took away his position as internal investigator.
So to be clear,
the
just to make
government
sure,
actually,
sorry, Ryan, just so everyone understands, Larry Wooten works for the government, for the Bureau of Land Management, came forward to expose the wrongdoing.
that is correct. Yes, he was a BLM internal investigator to make sure things were going right, and yet when he brought the wrongs to light, he was dismissed and anyway, basically wasn't fired, but he was demoted terribly because he was trying to bring these atrocities to light. Now, the letter that he wrote, the government took that, claimed that he wasn't telling the truth, that it was fantastical. And so then Larry, in response, wrote a second letter bringing more things to light. Now, the interesting thing about this second letter is that they have hidden it with great effort. I have not yet seen this second letter. I've heard about some of the things that might be in it, but they will not let that letter out. The prosecutors are holding that letter in their office, and it is completely hidden from everybody.
But not only that, the first letter is still under seal. We wanted it made public. It just so happens that Larry Wooten himself made it public through a congressman, and that's why it's out there. But Navarro wouldn't let that out, you see. And she didn't dismiss this case out of the goodness of her heart. She dismissed it because her career was going down the drain along with the prosecutors at the time. Las Vegas Review-Journal had said that that prosecutors have a friend in Gloria Navarro, and pointed out all of the constitutional violations that occurred up to that point in time. So basically, she bailed out. She didn't want to be tarred and feathered along with these prosecutors when all this stuff came out. But let me say, I'll give you a little bit of strategy here. It's not magic. But we're going to be filing a motion with the Ninth Circuit to send the case back to get the testimony of Wooten to supplement the record, because once he testifies, and hopefully the Ninth Circuit will grant that motion, I mean, that's all she wrote for these prosecutors. Their career is over. They'll probably be, I mean, if the Justice Department has any degree of honesty in it at all, indicted themselves, and certainly they'll lose their law licenses. One can only hope. But if Wooten goes under oath, that's the death knell for this appeal, much less the death knell for the careers of these prosecutors.
Right. And this picture we're looking at here, this is Matt Shea, or this is Larry Wooten?
That's Matt Shea.
So
he's the congressman.
He's the congressman that Wooten shared the information with. I remember seeing a press conference where this congressman spoke about all this. It's shocking. And what Wooten is doing is exactly what we need people in these agencies to do. we always hear that, the line agents are the good guys trying to do the right thing, and there's just, 1% or something at the top who are corrupt. But this is the problem when an honest man steps forward to expose the corruption and gets squashed.
And he was threatened by Myra, and it's in his letters. Okay, and he was told to be quiet, and he was demoted. Okay, and that's what happens to whistleblowers. And see, Myra doesn't.
So in other words,
Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah. I believe that, both the prosecutors, the Department of Justice, the prosecutors, and other agencies such as the Bureau of Land Management, these federal agencies are full of corrupt people. And there's only, say, 1% that are good, such as Larry Wooten, who is willing to tell the truth and willing to come forth when things are wrong. And yet they are knocked down for their goodness.
It's a very dangerous situation for us to have. We need the whistleblowers within the DOJ, the FBI, the BLM, etc. When we ask that question, who watches the watchers, these guys are the ones, and they've got to be protected.
I want to point something else. I'm shifting a little bit here, but what the Bundys went through, and the family's a national treasure, but it's such a strong story that there are actually 2 television series that kind of take off on the Bundys. One of them is starring Kevin Costner. He has a ranch near Yellowstone, and he has a show called Yellowstone, which he acts in and produces. Now, the Bundys are really good people. They don't have a dark side. They only have a good side, typically Hollywood. But it talks about, this is a patriarch that has a ranch. His family's ranched it, for decades. And the BLM moves in and tries to take it away. The Indian tribes are trying to take it away. Land developers are trying to come in and build condominiums and take it away. And he's fighting for his family heritage. So I urge people to watch it, even though it's not the Bundys, because the Bundys are totally good. Watch it, because Hollywood's picked up on this, you see, and they understand that land and the ownership of land, that's what our country's all about. That's the bedrock of our country. And then there's another show, Canadian television. It's called Heartland. And it's about a really good family like the Bundys that ranches. And, in Canada, in Calgary, it's a lot like the West. It's not too far, actually, even from Bunkerville, where the ranch is. And I urge people to watch it, because this is what America is all about. And, by supporting the Bundys and believing in them, you're actually supporting the vision of our founding fathers.
Yeah, I think everybody should be supporting the notion that we're innocent until proven guilty, and that we want fair trials where prosecutors aren't lying and withholding Brady information, exculpatory information. And it's basically like the prosecutors are the criminals and they're coming after honest Americans. It's not like that. It is that.
And they don't have to answer, see?
Yes, you got that right. That's what's going on. I studied this whole process or studied the prosecuting attorney and what his job actually is. The prosecuting attorney is supposed to bring forth the truth. They're supposed to be protecting the innocent, and the accused is considered innocent until proven guilty, supposedly. So the prosecutor, although bringing forth the truth, is supposed to protect the accused as much as anybody else. And yet that's not what's taking place. They will get a conviction, whatever it takes. They will get a conviction. That's their entire goal.
That's how they get promotions, and that's, if they leave the Justice Department, they get high-paying jobs in big law firms, and that's the reality. And when I was a Justice Department lawyer, on the very first day, okay, my chief sat me down and said, Larry, I want you to know, you don't just represent the American government. You don't just represent these agencies that you're representing, like the FDA, FTC, but you represent the people on the other side of the table, the defendants. And you have to be fair, and you have to be just. You have a different responsibility than if you were a private lawyer. And unfortunately, that concept of the Justice Department, by and large, no longer exists.
And I remember, Ryan, when we had our first interview, You had just been released from prison. You had the Constitution in your pocket, and you spoke to me quite extensively how the Constitution is designed to protect the accused, to really, really be deferential to those that are accused and have the assumption, the assertion that you're innocent until it's proven. But that is not the way it's happening today.
No, that's not. The ideals of our founding fathers have been lost through, different acts of Congress or through, precedences or just common practices nowadays, to the point that, the ideals of our founding fathers have just been forgotten and left in the dust. And those who are accused have very little protections, nothing like our founding fathers intended them to have. It's terrible.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, you're showing my radio show there, Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Ryan's going to be on this Sunday. It's heard in Las Vegas and many other places around the country. You can get it on podcast. It's up at freedomwatchusa.org. It's up on radioamerica.com. But it's called Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. I might say these days I wear two hats. I'm Special Defense Counsel with Larry Klayman, too. And I'll tell you something. If I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't be a prosecutor for the Justice Department. I would be a criminal defense lawyer, because that's how bad things have become. And, but I wouldn't represent people I don't believe in. I only represent people I truly believe in, and those are the Bundys and some other clients.
And of course, that's what you're doing now with freedomwatchusa.org. I always encourage Crowdsource the Truth viewers to go to freedomwatchusa.org and to donate to support Larry and his team, who are over there fighting for our rights, fighting for justice. I mean, when we hear about people like Stephen Myre, like Robert Mueller, like Rod Rosenstein, I mean, we are in serious trouble, gentlemen. Without the Justice Department being straightened out, we see how this leads to they're controlling the office of the president right now with this corrupt investigation.
Yeah, in many ways, the Bundys, and the president are being treated similarly.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the president is taking bad advice. Ryan and his dad and his brother see things more clearly than the president even. And rather than just tweeting, and I love the president, I'm not in any way knocking him, but they actually took concrete action. Ryan is actually bringing lawsuits against these prosecutors and the BLM and the FBI and the Justice Department. The president should be doing the same thing. He has rights. He's an American citizen, but he's getting dragged along to the guillotine. And in the next few months, all hell's going to break loose. Just today, Adam Schiff, the congressman from West Hollywood, I might add, announced that he's going to conduct a massive investigation of President Trump's finances, which has nothing to do with Russian collusion. I mean, it's out of control.
Well, it's really out of control, because I'm not sure what makes Adam Schiff think he can just investigate whoever he wants in the absence of evidence. I mean, you're right. This is very similar to what happened to the Bundy family, because they've basically constructed a crime and they're constructing the evidence and they're just investigating Trump until they find something that they can do something with. There's been a 2-year investigation so far by Robert Mueller's special counsel office. Has turned up no incriminating evidence tied to Donald Trump. And aside from being the president, he's certainly a citizen of the United States and deserves all the rights that each of us do. Gentlemen, we're almost at the end of our hour here. And before we go, Ryan, can you give us some background on these suits that you're bringing against the prosecutors? Will you represent yourself pro se on those? And what's the status?
Ryan and I are counsel on that case.
Got it.
And I'm proud to have him as my co-counsel pro se on that.
Well, the case is basically just addressing, the prosecutorial misconduct and also the atrocities that they have done against us. All the harm that I guess I can include my family, but this suit does not include everybody else, so it's just particular to me. But all the harm that they have done to me, such as keeping me in prison for 2 years without any determination of guilt, and all that punishment and harm it's also harmful to my wife and my children. It was very detrimental upon my children. I have 8 children.
Wow.
My youngest was only, a few months old, and yet, very impressionable years that they had to go without their father.
That's terrible.
And it was very hard on my children, very hard on my wife, hard on my income and my business. And
yeah.
So.
When Ryan was in prison along with his brother, they violated his religious rights too, and that's part of the complaint. And it was just a total persecution, start to finish.
Absolutely. This aspect, Ryan, of your children, I think, may be the most troubling, because there's no restitution that can bring that back. And I don't think the people reading the fake news consider those types of things. These government employees, the prosecutors who did this, each of them should spend at least as much time in jail as you and your father and your brother, that everybody was forced to do. This is one of the worst things. We haven't even spoken about Lavoie. I mean, this is one of the worst things that's ever happened in the United States.
It is.
Well, you know what? I would even forego them going to jail. I don't think that they need to do that. But this system of prosecuting and people wrongfully needs to be brought to a stop. When I study the Constitution and look at the jurisdictions of the United States, the federal government does not have constitutional jurisdiction to try a crime. All crimes are to be tried in the state, and yet we have an entire Justice Department that's all they do is try crimes. From whence do they get the authority to try crimes? And so the whole Department of Justice needs to be shut down.
Well, we didn't have a Department of Justice until 1870, July 1st. And it was before that the American people meted out justice. And I would submit, about our citizens' grand juries. And if Ryan wants to participate in that with what's happened as well, is that the American people have the right to peacefully and legally mete out justice on their own. And we certainly can do a better job than the Department of Justice today.
Well, the Article 3 of the United States Constitution lays out 6 jurisdictions that the federal court has. All 6 jurisdictions only cover civil matters. The only criminal jurisdiction that the federal court is given is that for impeachment. And that is it. That is it. And so criminal jurisdiction resides with the states. And yet the states must stand up and demand that the jurisdiction be restored. That was one of the things I would have done had I become governor of Nevada. I would have put a stop to all federal prosecutions in the state of Nevada, because the federal government simply does not have constituted jurisdiction to try crimes.
And am I incorrect, Ryan, to say that this change came about because the government just simply did it, as they did with trying to steal your family's land, and there was nobody at the time who stood in opposition, so they got away with it, and nobody says anything, and they just go ahead and do it?
Well, that's how the government gets away with most things that it does. The 10th Amendment makes it clear that Congress and or the other branches of the government does not have the right to do anything that they haven't specifically been given to do. And yet they're doing hundreds, literally hundreds, maybe thousands of things that they do not have constitutional jurisdiction or authority to do. And yet they're doing them. And why are they doing them? Because they oppose it. This is where the checks and balances are supposed to come in. Our states are supposed to stand up and say, no, government, you cannot do this, and put a stop to it. But our states are weak. Our governors are weak, and they will not stand up and tell the federal government no. And that's the problem.
By the way, Jason is showing a picture of the Federal Detention Center in Pahrump, Nevada. You can see how desolate it is. It's out in the desert. It's Area 51, where they used to explode atom bombs.
That place needs to be torn down. That place needs to be destructed.
Yeah, and this is also interesting enough. I'll give a quick story. I know we're running out of time. I'm walking out of prison one day after I met with Cliven, and I'm walking out with a guard. And I said, boy, this place is the modern day Alcatraz, rattlesnakes instead of, San Francisco Bay. He says, you know what I'm worried about? I said, what's that? He says, I see UFOs every night here. And,
well, the reason I'm showing this,
guys, secret military base out there, and probably they're aircraft that we don't know anything about. But I'll tell you something. Yeah, that's a scary place.
The reason I'm showing it, and I want to make sure that people understand, what Ryan's saying is not a negative feeling about this facility due to being wrongfully incarcerated in there, physically abused, violated, having his rights trounced. The reason why this place needs to close is because this is a privately owned prison. This is a for-profit business right here owned by Core Civic, formerly Corrections Corporation of America, a company that Dick Cheney sits on the board of directors of and was indicted in the state of Texas for prison profiteering. Now, there's a lot of talk about socialism and democratic socialism, but yet we've got this system where something that should be operated by the government is a for-profit business. Now, I think prisons should be operated not for profit by the government, and things like air traffic control should be run by airlines or airports or the businesses that need that. This is another major problem, is that the police officers and the companies that own these prisons and the judges, there have been scandals where judges are receiving money from these for-profit prisons to stick people in there.
Well, yeah, they got to fill them up to be able to make a profit. So that's what they do.
Ryan, I'm very sympathetic to the torture that you and your family have been put through, particularly your young children. This is something that can never be given back to you or them, and I feel for you. If there's ever anything that I can do to help, certainly having you on the show or anything, I hope to be able to do that.
We appreciate that, Jason, and we know you're our friend, and we really cherish you because Crowdsource the Truth lets us say what we want to say. It's not filtered. It's not censored. After this thing became controversial, we never got with the Bundys on Fox News anymore. And they ran away from that. And you don't run away from anything, and the American people are not running away from anything. We have to stand up and we have to fight legally and peacefully.
Absolutely. Ryan, anything you'd like to say to our viewers in closing?
Yeah, I appreciate that too, Jason. And well, I always want to encourage people to study the United States Constitution and to understand their rights and to make sure that they repent of their sins and live a worthy life. One of our founding fathers said that this form of government that our founding fathers created for us is only sufficient for a moral and religious people and is inadequate for the governing of any other. And so if we want freedom, if we want our rights, then we have got to be on par with God's law and with natural law, and we need to understand what those laws are, understand who we are, that we are children of our Father in heaven, and that we have rights that are endowed by Him. They do not come from government, and that government's only legitimate purpose is to aid us in claiming, using, and defending our rights. And that is what our founding fathers tried to do through the establishment of the Constitution for the United States.
Well said. It was our second American president, John Adams, who said while he was a founding father, just a few days before signing the Declaration of Independence in my native city of Philadelphia, doesn't matter how many times you change your rulers or forms of government, without ethics, morality, and religion, you will not have a lasting liberty.
Well
Gentlemen,
said.
Yes, very well said. I want to thank you both for joining me tonight. Ryan, can you let everyone know what the best way to get in touch with you would be if they want to support you financially or communicate with you otherwise?
Yes, I have an email, which is just send it to Governor Bundy at gmail.com. That email is still active. I haven't been using it so much, but it's there. I need to get a new one, but right now just Governor Bundy at gmail.com, even though I did not obtain the governor's seat. And for now, that'll work. Or they could, if they wish to send a piece of mail, they can mail to 361 Riverside Road in Mesquite, Nevada, and that's zip code 89027. And so whether they want to send correspondence or, make a donation, that's the place to send it.
I hope you will run for governor again. We need more people like you defending our rights.
Well, if he wins, he'll be the only one in government today that I know of that you can trust.
Absolutely. And of course, Larry, people who are watching that want to support Freedom Watch can go to freedomwatchusa.org. They can click on the donate button. They can listen to the radio show. They can sign the petitions. It might be too late to replace William Barr, but I hope he'll do the right thing. Larry, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. You're defending so many important cases that I really hope everyone appreciates the impact of these matters, and I hope they will support Freedom Watch. I want to thank Ryan Bundy and Larry Klayman for joining me tonight. I want to thank everyone for watching, and remember, Crowdsource the Truth is a viewer-sponsored resource. So if you're watching and enjoying the shows, please go to patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth or subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Become a sponsor and you're going to enjoy exclusive content on both of those channels. I will be back tomorrow, and I want to thank my guests and everyone for watching. Have a great night.
Thank you, Jason.
Okay, thank you.